Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. It is Monday, July 21st, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm speaking today with U.S. Bureau Chief Jacob Magid. Hey, Jacob, how are you?
Hi, Jessica. Good to be with you again.
Good to be with you as well. It is day 654 of the war. The U.S. administration appears to be quite angry at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after the IDF strikes in Syria last week. Jacob and I talked about that at length last week, just a few days ago. The administration views the actions as harming the Gaza negotiations. So we'll, of course, talk about that. We'll also talk about the negotiations. Hamas is currently being accused of dragging its feet in the ongoing talks. And we'll also discuss the latest with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the aid situation in Gaza, which does not appear to be improving at all. Jacob will fill us in on that as well. So stay with us. Okay, Jacob, let's start with these reports about, obviously, U.S. President Donald Trump and his administration, very angry at Prime Minister Netanyahu. What do we think is actually happening right here? The Syria situation, as we were discussing it, the ceasefire appears to be holding, and now we're hearing about a lot of anger. So tell us what you think is happening.
That's correct. So there was a pretty interesting report in Axios by reporter Barak Ravid, who's quite well sourced and who spoke to several officials who used very colorful language to describe their frustration with Prime Minister Netanyahu. So to be clear, this is not Trump himself, and it'll be interesting to understand in the coming days whether Trump also feels the same way. Some of his officials, which appeared to be among them Tom Barrack, the U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, and others in the administration who are very frustrated with the way that the Israeli government approached last week's tensions in Syria. I think the feeling is that the U.S. argues that there's not clear connection between Ahmed Shara's government and some of the atrocities that took place against Druze, and also there were a lot of Bedouin clans that were also their massacres committed against. I think it was both sides, and there's not a lot of clarity at this point. Those kind of trying to frame this as a black and white situation, everything was against the Druze, I think that's a little bit simplistic. But the point is that the Trump administration has put a lot of capital into trying to prop up and give Shara a chance to move Syria forward. And they feel that Israel went too far in its responses against deciding to target the regime over attacks against Druze that they felt weren't unequivocally tied to the regime. And specifically, they took issue with the strikes that were conducted on Syrian government sites, like the defense ministry headquarters that was just bombed to the ground a few days ago by the IDF as the attacks on Druze seemed to escalate. And this was kind of a message to the government. They didn't want them getting close to the southern Syria, which Israel felt was a red line. But bottom line, this was something that the Trump administration just was not supportive of. The arguments that these Trump officials are making is that they feel that Israel is possibly ruining this, what could be the last chance to stabilize Syria. Otherwise, it will just simply deteriorate to more sectarian violence. And there's a recognition that maybe Shara isn't the best perfect candidate for the job, but that's basically what we have, and we want to try to work with him and give him a chance. Here's the caveat I'll say about some of this reporting. This is a lot of times a tool that U.S. officials use to blow off steam is to criticize Netanyahu on condition of anonymity in the press, but not actually act against him in practice. And we saw this all of the time during the Biden administration, where you'd constantly be hearing how frustrated U.S. officials were from Netanyahu, but they wouldn't actually act on it. And we'll have to see if there's a difference between Biden and Trump. We don't, as I mentioned, we don't know if Trump himself feels the same way that these U.S. officials do, his aides. And I do think there are some in the administration, possibly Marco Rubio and others who are a little bit more aligned with the Israeli position that don't feel and wouldn't use the colorful language that whoever these anonymous officials were using. But it comes after, I think, it's part of an environment where it's happening after several attacks. There was the strike on the only Catholic church in Gaza around the same period of time. There was the repeated settler attacks on a Christian village. and the killing of a Palestinian American that all warranted criticism from sometimes Trump himself and others in the administration. And I think maybe that's also playing into the reason that there's extra frustration with Netanyahu, and that was definitely played out in this article.
But it is interesting, Jacob. I mean, you just sort of touched on this, but the fact that you have Trump aides and you had Biden aides who, in a sense, are complaining about the same things regarding Netanyahu, even though we have very different administrations, of course.
Right. And I also think, though, that even though they might be fuming in the case of Trump, I guess you could say he's put his money where his mouth is, even though he was swearing at Israel for, I think he said they don't know what the F they're doing at the end of that Iran ceasefire a couple of weeks ago. But at the end of the day, he was willing to carry out that strike. And Bibi was able, despite all this anger that's felt among Trump officials, Netanyahu was able to navigate the relationship with the U.S. in a way that got the U.S. not only to allow it to move forward and carry out this massive strikes and launch a war against Iran, but also to convince the U.S. to join the war and do something that no other president was willing to do. And that took a lot of, I think, maybe canceling out all the noise that was coming from these kinds of stories and still being able to navigate the relationship and leverage Trump in the way he wanted. And it wasn't a done deal. All the negotiations with Iran were part of an kind of a psyop or an effort to kind of put Iran to sleep. I think that's not the case. I think Trump really wanted to get a deal with Iran. And Netanyahu, it took time to move off that path. And I guess Netanyahu, for him to convince Trump that this is not something that Iran's not very serious. When Trump was saying, basically, this doesn't go well, if you call me and try to reach me, I'll say, Bibi who? Because I won't want anything to do with you if this doesn't go well. So despite all this criticism, Netanyahu has still been able to manage the relationship to date. Now, could that change? Yes, we're seeing from these things that the relationship is very fraught, and you can't assume Trump is on your side. And one day, if that he will be the next as well.
Got it. Now, you said that one of the reasons the U.S. administration was angry with Netanyahu was because of the talks that it's been trying to hold with Syria. But I imagine it's also because of it could be harming the negotiations with Hamas as well. Now, Hamas is being accused of dragging its feet in these ongoing hostage negotiations, which have not fallen apart as of yet. What week are we even in of this last round, right?
We're into the third week.
Okay. I would have said fourth, but okay. So what do we think is happening with that? I mean, obviously, that putting aside Trump and Netanyahu for the moment, where are we in this third or coming to the end of a third week of negotiations?
So the frustration for now does not extend to the hostage talks, I would say. I think there is an understanding amongst the U.S., the Qataris, and the Egyptians right now that the ball is in Hamas's court and it's taking too long to respond to these updated Israeli maps that the mediators feel is a real game changer because it saw Israel come down from demands to stay in a lot more of Gaza that the mediators felt would not have allowed a deal to move forward. And there's a lot of frustration that Hamas has taken. I think basically there was updated maps. There were some errors that Israel had submitted in them that had to be fixed. But basically, since Wednesday or Thursday, Hamas has just been deliberating, and the mediators have not gotten a hard response regarding whether we're able to move forward on that issue of move on to other issues. And the one explanation that was given to me by one of the mediators involved in the talks, he said that it takes time for Hamas to get a response from its leaders in Gaza. It's an excuse, a reason that's been given countless times before throughout these talks, but that is what they are arguing. But this mediator used also quite colorful language to describe his frustration with Hamas, basically saying that every day that they wait and drag their feet, over 100 people in Gaza are being killed as this war continues. And that's on Hamas's hands as much as it is on Israel's, was his argument. So, but despite all this frustration, the overall trend of the talks, according to the mediators I spoke with, is still positive. They do still feel that we can maybe get to a breakthrough and even an announcement of a deal by the end of this week. It's not going to be tomorrow or the next day, but because they still need to finalize a lot of talks about who will be released in exchange for the hostages. There's some small things about regarding humanitarian aid that need to be finalized, but those things mediators feel will not be the kinds of obstacles that once we got Israel to stand down on the issue of withdrawal and Hamas to stand down and demanding an end to the war in exchange for hostages, that we really think we're able to move forward. Obviously, the indicator will be whether Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy, comes to the region. That will be a sign that he's the marker that he's trying to close this deal. It won't be to maybe settle earlier disagreements. I think he's coming to finish this and make an announcement.
Okay. All right, let's take a break, and when we're back, let's actually talk about what is happening with humanitarian aid in Gaza and the situation that seems to build or certainly stay in the same place every day. So stay with us. So, Jacob, we have the report of at least 73 Gazans killed on Sunday. The majority, it's being reported as they were seeking aid at the distribution site. There are these daily reports of deadly Israeli fire, but then we also have a report on our page. The IDF published a video showing troops standing meters from Palestinians collecting food while commanders instructed soldiers not to open fire. But then you have 73 Gazans killed and a number of them at the site. So what are you hearing on this today? And connecting to what you were just speaking about in terms of hostage negotiations, how does this situation get resolved? Let's talk about the aid. Let's talk about today first, and then we'll talk about the larger issue.
Sure. So as you mentioned, the reports, and I guess not just reports, where the Hamas health ministry is talking about 67 people who were killed trying to receive aid in northern Gaza. Basically, there was one of the UN's convoys was trying to bring aid into one of their warehouses and was just thronged by people. The IDF felt it said that in its statement afterwards that they fired warning shots because the troops felt under threat, that some of the people also rushed towards the troops. It acknowledged that some people were hit, but it says the Hamas figures of 67 are exaggerated. On the other hand, it doesn't give a alternative death toll. And I think at this point, it takes a lot of chutzpah to say, don't trust Hamas figures on one hand, but on the other hand, we're not going to let journalists into Gaza to verify the incident on the other hand. So I think that's something. And then as you mentioned, there's this video that they issued several hours after I think there was a mounting international outcry over this latest incident, which, as you mentioned, is happening every day, where you see soldiers very close to this massive throng of probably thousands of Palestinians trying to pick up aid. And you hear the commander telling the soldiers, don't shoot, don't shoot. And even then, a point where you have the Palestinians even waving at the soldiers. It's not really clear what they were saying. But this is just, it feels a little bit like we're being gaslit, that if you're already admitting on the one hand that you fired warning shots and that those shots struck people, to try to argue then that actually it looked really what it did in this video is just not honest. And I think that is what, I don't think this video is going to convince a lot of people. I think these incidents just highlight the desperation of the situation in Gaza. They're, again, according to the Hamas health ministry, so that's the caveat, and I think they want to highlight the fact that the situation's dire to make Israel look as the culprit. 18 people died due to complications of starvation yesterday, but it's not just the Hamas health ministry saying this. The CNN did a report following a 4-year-old in Gaza that they've been talking to or her family over the past few months. She was among those who died due to these complications. It's a man with special needs was also amongst them. I think it highlights that these are the weakest populations that are being impacted. We're still likely seeing footage of people in Gaza who look okay, but that doesn't mean that therefore the others are, that the rest of the population is fine. I think there's basically, if 18 in one day, that's a much higher number, given that even according to the Hamas health ministry, only 70 have died throughout the entire war due to complications of starvation. So right now we're clearly at a very dire position in this war. And it comes as the World Central Kitchen saying it was forced to shut down again its operations in Gaza due to the lack of aid. And I think what aid organizations are saying is that the solution is to simply flood the zone with aid. We get that Israel wants to try to make sure that Hamas is out of the equation, but an effective way to do that is to simply just flood the zone to have as much aid as possible.
What does flooding the zone mean? What does that look like?
Getting as much aid as possible through as many crossings as possible. It makes aid, the value of aid go down, demand goes down, and you don't see these desperate situations. B, Hamas isn't able to exploit the little aid that's going in to charge exorbitant amounts of money to when it's being sold on black market or just in regular markets. Flour right now, I spoke to one Palestinian in southern Gaza. She said that it costs 350 shekels a kilo. So that's kind of the best indicator that you can argue. Maybe there's different arguments about the whether or not whether it's starvation specifically or something lesser than that. But that's something that's just the raw economics of it, that you can't argue that the situation isn't dire and that there's a very limited amount of food going into Gaza.
And let's just say that 350 shekels, we're talking about $100 for a kilo of flour, just to put that into dollar terms.
So I think that's basically what has led Israel to hold an emergency meeting, with UN agency heads on Sunday, I was told a few minutes ago, to try to address this issue. Israel's saying, okay, we're going to allow more aid in.
Bringing in all of these factors that we're talking about, there's the IDF issue, which is one part of the aid issue. There's the idea of just getting aid out to these populations so that they have what they need, so that they don't have to pay 350 shekels on the black market for a kilo of flour. And then there's, for instance, the UN agency, which is trying to, find solutions here. But besides the talks that are taking place in order to solve the situation, is there any other body that's really saying, okay, we could do this, this, and this in order to help resolve or at least help lighten the load on the aid situation?
The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation definitely is presenting itself as the answer to a lot of these issues. And it's been highlighting, I think we're now it says it's distributed 82 million meals since I think it's been operating for about 56 days. So that sounds like a lot. And therefore that would be a lot of reason for hope. But I think also it's a little bit more gray and not that simple. We're talking about mainly dry food products that they don't have the cooking gas to actually cook it. There's very little electricity in Gaza oftentimes. They're living in tents that don't have necessarily the equipment to put cook the pasta that they're getting, or the beans or the rice, and they don't have refrigerators to keep it, or the clean water oftentimes as well is lacking. So it's not, I think, a simple 82 million meals that are just been filling the stomachs of Gazans. It's I think probably much less than that. And the key other issue is we don't know who is being fed when they're picking up these meals. Due to the totally chaotic situation, which I think is spurred by the fact that people are so hungry, so they haven't been able to try to vet or just document who's been picking up each package of aid. Because what we're seeing is that these sites open, they announce that they're opening only like 5 minutes before, just when they see too many people that they're not able to basically contain the fence. So then they open the gates, and then everyone just like floods the humanitarian distribution sites and picks up what they can. They basically throw open the boxes and put as much food as they can into basically sacks that they're then carrying with them back to their families who are many, many kilometers away. And we don't know, though, if these people are tied to Hamas. If Hamas clearly is, there's been more and more evidence that they're trying to instigate clashes with the IDF on en route to these sites. And I think it's probably behind some of the shootings that have been taking place, that you have these Hamas agitators. But there's Israel saying it's bypassing Hamas, but we don't know who's picking up this aid to really prove that. And we're also seeing I think there was another testimony from a former UG Solutions American contractor who the GHF is working with. They were interviewed on Channel 12 over the weekend and talked about having seen actually other contractors hurling a pepper spray at an old man who was trying to pick up scraps of noodles that were left on the ground because he wasn't strong enough to pick up the box of food when everyone was first getting to it. So just at the very end, when the GHF is trying to get people out of the site, he was trying to pick up noodles, and they were wanted to rush him out, so they pepper sprayed him. And another woman was hit in the head with a stun grenade and was unconscious. The GHF person, or the UG contractor, so they don't even know if the woman survived. But I think there's been some improvement since then. I spoke with one Israeli official on Saturday who said there was a little bit of hope that this would be the magic solution to simply destroying Hamas and gaining control of the aid and situation and stabilizing the humanitarian situation in Gaza. That hasn't so far been the case. GHF hopes that if you had more cooperation with UN organizations, that it would be able to produce more aid at scale and more sites. But UN organizations argue that we're not going to comply with a mechanism that forces Gazans into these militarized hubs where day after day they're coming under fire, and therefore you're in this kind of cycle of violence that we're seeing again and again. These reports. There seems to be a bit more reporting on it in Israeli media, but there was a Channel 13 guest that was on over the weekend, and she was trying to talk about these issues, but was waved off by the anchor to talk about something else. So I think it's not fully making it into the media discourse, at least in Hebrew media. And as a result of that, there's no discussion about how many civilian casualties is too much. That doesn't seem to be part of any sort of media discourse, because clearly Hamas wants as many as possible, but what do we want? And I don't think that's been something that's been discussed. And it's what I think what we're trying to do with TOI is at least have those questions raised.
Right. So there's the issue of how much aid is actually getting out there, and of course, what happens at these aid sites, which we keep uncovering. Thanks, Jacob. Thanks for helping us cover it.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks to you for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing, and we'll be back again tomorrow with another installment. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. Always feel free to recommend us to other listeners and rate us wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, take care, be well, and have yourselves a good week.